It all started on a quiet Tuesday morning when I woke up to a bright yellow envelope taped to my front door. The words Homeowners Association were stamped in bold letters across the top. I rolled my eyes. The HOA had been a thorn in my side ever since I moved into the neighborhood 5 years ago, but this time it felt different. I tore open the envelope and pulled out the letter. My eyes scanned the page, and my jaw dropped. Illegal vehicles on property, it read. Failure to comply will result in fines and possible legal action. I looked out at my driveway, where my two vintage cars, a 1967 Mustang and a 1972 Chevy pickup, sat proudly. Illegal? Seriously? I stormed over to my neighbor, Mike, who was watering his lawn. Mike, did you get one of these? I waved the letter in the air. He nodded, looking just as annoyed. Yeah, they're saying my RV is too big for the driveway. What's next? Fining us for having too many flowers in the garden. The HOA, led by a woman named Patricia, had always been strict, but this was a new low. Patricia was the kind of person who measured grass with a ruler and sent warning letters if your trash cans were out 5 minutes too late. She had a clipboard permanently glued to her hand and a smug smile that made you want to scream. I decided to confront her. I marched over to the HOA office, which was just a small room in the community center. Patricia was sitting at her desk, typing away on her computer. She looked up as I walked in, her smile widening like she'd been waiting for me. Ah, Mr. Carter, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I assume you're here about the notice. You bet I am, I said, slamming the letter on her desk. What's this nonsense about my cars being illegal? Patricia leaned back in her chair, folding her hands neatly. According to HOA bylaws, vehicles over a certain size or age are not permitted in driveways. They're considered eyesores and can lower property values. Eyesores? I laughed. Those cars are classics. People stop to take pictures of them. Patricia's smile didn't waver. Rules are rules, Mr. Carter. If you don't remove the vehicles, we'll have no choice but to escalate the matter. I left the office fuming. This wasn't just about the cars. It was about control. Patricia and her HOA cronies thought they could dictate how we lived our lives. Well, I wasn't going to let that happen. That evening, I called a meeting with a few neighbors who were just as fed up. Mike was there, along with Sarah, who'd been fined for having a pink mailbox, and Tom, who'd been told his kid's treehouse was a safety hazard. We sat in my garage, surrounded by tools and car parts, brainstorming our next move. We can't just sit back and let them push us around, I said. We need to fight back. But how? Sarah asked. They've got all the power. They can fine us, take us to court, even put liens on our homes. I leaned forward, a plan forming in my mind. What if we hit them where it hurts? What if we make them realize they're not as untouchable as they think? The room fell silent as I laid out my idea. The next morning I woke up early, but my mind racing with the plan I'd shared with my neighbors. It was simple but bold. We'd expose the HOA's hypocrisy. Patricia and her crew loved to enforce rules, but I was willing to bet they weren't following them all themselves. I started by taking a walk around the neighborhood, snapping pictures of anything that seemed even slightly out of line. A broken fence here, an overgrown bush there, and bingo, Patricia's own house. Her driveway was cluttered with gardening tools, and her trash cans were still out well past the allowed time. I smirked. Rules for thee, but not for me, huh? I compiled the photos into a folder and printed out copies of the HOA bylaws. Then, I called another meeting with Mike, Sarah, and Tom. This time, we met at Sarah's house, where her pink mailbox stood as a silent protest against the HOA's absurdity. Look at this, I said, spreading the photos on her kitchen table. Patricia's breaking her own rules. If we can prove she's not following the bylaws, we can challenge her authority. Mike picked up a photo of Patricia's messy driveway. This is gold, but how do we use it without getting slapped with a lawsuit? We play it smart, I said. We don't attack her directly, we just ask questions like, why are some people getting fined while others aren't? If we can get enough people questioning the HOA's fairness, they'll have to back down. Sarah nodded, her eyes lighting up. We could start a petition, get the whole neighborhood involved. If enough people sign it, they can't ignore us. Tom, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. What if we take it to the local news? A story about an HOA gone rogue would definitely get their attention. I grinned. Now you're thinking. But let's start small. We'll hand out flyers, talk to neighbors, and see how many people are willing to stand up to Patricia. Over the next few days, we worked tirelessly. Mike and I went door to door, handing out flyers and explaining our plan. Sarah used her social media skills to create a neighborhood group where people could share their grievances. Tom, who was good with words, drafted a letter to the HOA board, demanding transparency and fairness. The response was overwhelming. People we'd never even met before came forward with stories of HOA overreach. One woman had been fined for having a bird feeder. Another man was told his Halloween decorations were too scary. It seemed like everyone had a reason to be angry. But Patricia wasn't going to let us win without a fight. A few days after we started our campaign, I received another letter from the HOA. This one was even more threatening. Dear Mr. Carter, it began, your recent actions have been deemed disruptive to the community. Continued defiance of HOA rules will result in immediate fines and possible legal action. I laughed as I read it. Disruptive? They hadn't seen anything yet. That evening, I called another meeting. This time, more neighbors showed up, cramming into my garage. I stood on a stool, holding up the letter for everyone to see. They're scared, I said. They know we're onto them, but we can't stop now. We need to keep pushing. The room erupted in cheers. For the first time in years, it felt like we had a real chance to take back our neighborhood. But Patricia wasn't done. The next morning, I woke up to find a bright orange sticker plastered on my Mustang. Violation, it read in bold letters. Vehicle must be removed within 48 hours or face towing. I ripped the sticker off, my blood boiling. This was war. The sticker on my Mustang was the final straw. I wasn't just going to sit back and let Patricia bully me, or anyone else in the neighborhood. I called Mike, Sarah, and Tom over to my house that evening. We needed to escalate things, but we had to be smart about it. Okay, I said, spreading a map of the neighborhood on my kitchen table. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to hit them where it hurts, their reputation. Sarah leaned in, her eyes narrowing. What do you mean? I pointed to the map. We're going to organize a neighborhood event, a big one, right here in the park. We'll call it Community Freedom Day. We'll have food, games, live music, everything the HOA hates. And we'll invite the local news to cover it. Mike raised an eyebrow. Won't the HOA shut it down? I smirked. They can try. But if we do it right, they'll look like the bad guys, and with the media watching, they won't dare. Tom nodded slowly. It's risky, but it could work. What do we need to do? First, we spread the word, I said. Sarah, you handle social media. Mike, you talk to the neighbors. Tom, you and I will handle the logistics, food, music, permits. Over the next few days, we worked like crazy. Sarah created a buzz online, posting about the event in every local group she could find. Mike went door to door, handing out flyers and rallying support. Tom and I reached out to local businesses for sponsorships and booked a band to play at the park. The response was incredible. People were excited, not just about the event, but about standing up to the HOA. Even some of the quieter neighbors started coming forward, offering to help. But Patricia wasn't going to let this slide. 2 days before the event, I received another letter from the HOA. This one was short and to the point. Dear Mr. Carter, your planned event violates multiple HOA bylaws. Any unauthorized gatherings in the park will result in immediate fines and legal action. Sincerely, Patricia Collins, HOA President. I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the trash. They could threaten all they wanted, but we weren't backing down. The day of the event arrived and the park was packed. Families were everywhere, laughing and enjoying the food and music. The band was playing, kids were running around, and the smell of barbecue filled the air. It was perfect. Then, just as I was about to give a speech, I saw her, Patricia. She was standing at the edge of the park, clipboard in hand, glaring at the crowd. She looked like she'd just bitten into a lemon. I walked over to her, a smile plastered on my face. Patricia, so glad you could make it. Her eyes narrowed. This is completely unacceptable, Mr. Carter. You're violating multiple bylaws and I won't stand for it, I shrugged. We're just having a little fun. Isn't that what a community is all about? She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could say anything, a reporter from the local news approached us, camera in hand. Excuse me, the reporter said. I'm doing a story on the event. Can I ask you a few questions? Patricia froze, her face turning red. She shot me a look that could have melted steel, then turned on her heel and stormed off. The reporter turned to me. What was that about? I grinned. Just a little neighborhood drama. But let's focus on the fun, shall we? The event was a huge success. By the end of the day, everyone was talking about how great it felt to come together as a community. But I knew this wasn't the end. Patricia wasn't the type to give up easily. Sure enough, the next morning I woke up to find my driveway blocked by a bright orange traffic cone. A note was taped to it. Unauthorized event. Fine. $500. Pay within 7 days or face legal action. I laughed as I tossed the note aside. Patricia could find me all she wanted, but she couldn't stop us. The neighborhood was waking up and there was no going back. The $500 fine was just the beginning. Over the next few days, more letters arrived. Not just for me, but for Mike, Sarah, Tom, and even some neighbors who had simply attended the event. Patricia was throwing everything she had at us, but instead of backing down, the neighborhood only grew more united. One evening, as I was sorting through the pile of fines on my kitchen table, Mike called. You're not going to believe this, he said, his voice tense. Patricia just sent me a notice saying my RV is a public nuisance and has to be removed immediately. She's even threatening to tow it. I clenched my fists. She's trying to scare us, Mike, but we're not going to let her win. We need to hit her where it hurts, legally. The next morning, I called a lawyer friend of mine, Lisa, who specialized in property disputes. I explained the situation, and she agreed to help. HOAs have a lot of power, she said, but they're not above the law. If they're targeting you unfairly, we can fight back. With Lisa's help, we drafted a formal complaint against the HOA, citing harassment and selective enforcement of the bylaws. We also gathered evidence, photos, letters, and testimonies from neighbors who had been unfairly targeted. Meanwhile, Sarah had an idea. What if we organize another event, she suggested, during our next meeting? Something even bigger. We'll call it Neighborhood Unity Day and invite the whole town. If the HOA tries to stop us, it'll only make them look worse. I liked the idea, but I knew we had to be careful. Let's do it, I said. But this time, we'll make sure everything is by the book. We'll get permits, follow all the rules, even the stupid ones. That way they can't shut us down. The planning for Neighborhood Unity Day began in full swing. This time, we went all out. We booked a bigger park, hired a popular local band, and even arranged for food trucks to come. Sarah created a buzz online, and soon, the event was the talk of the town. But Patricia wasn't going to let this slide. A few days before the event, I received a call from Lisa. "I just got a notice from the HOA's lawyer," she said. "They're trying to get an injunction to stop the event. They're claiming it's a public safety hazard." I laughed. "A safety hazard? Really? What's next? Are they going to say the music is too loud?" Lisa sighed. "They're grasping at straws, but we need to be prepared. I'll file a counter motion, but it's going to be tight. The hearing is the day before the event." The next 24 hours were a blur. Lisa worked tirelessly to prepare our case, while Mike, Sarah, Tom, and I rallied the neighborhood for support. By the time the hearing rolled around, we had a packed courtroom, not just with neighbors, but with reporters and curious onlookers. The judge listened patiently as both sides presented their arguments. Patricia's lawyer claimed the event would cause irreparable harm to the community, while Lisa argued that the HOA was overstepping its authority. Finally, the judge made his decision. "I see no evidence that this event poses a safety hazard," he said. "The injunction is denied. The event may proceed as planned." The courtroom erupted in cheers. Patricia sat in stunned silence, her face pale. As we left the courthouse, I couldn't help but smile. We'd won this round, but I knew the fight wasn't over. The day of Neighborhood Unity Day arrived, and it was even bigger than we'd hoped. The park was packed with people from all over town, and the atmosphere was electric. The band played, the food trucks sold out, and kids ran around laughing. It was everything a community should be. But as I stood there, watching the crowd, I noticed something strange. Patricia was there too. She was standing at the edge of the park, clipboard in hand, watching silently. For the first time, she didn't look angry. She looked defeated. I walked over to her, unsure of what to say. "Patricia," I began, "I know we've had our differences, but this is what a community is supposed to be. Maybe it's time to rethink how the HOA operates." She didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked away. Her shoulders slumped. As I watched her go, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. Patricia had been so focused on control that she'd forgotten what it meant to be part of a community. But maybe, just maybe, this was a wake-up call for her. After the success of Neighborhood Unity Day, things in the neighborhood started to change. People were talking more, helping each other out, and standing up to the HOA's ridiculous rules. But Patricia wasn't done yet. She might have looked defeated that day, but I knew she wasn't the type to give up easily. A week after the event, I received a letter from the HOA. This one was different. It wasn't a fine or a threat. It was an invitation to a special meeting. The subject line read, "Discussion of Community Concerns." I showed the letter to Mike, Sarah, and Tom during our next meeting. "What do you think this is about?" I asked. Mike frowned. "Probably another attempt to shut us down. Maybe they're trying to change the bylaws to make it harder for us to organize events." Sarah shook her head. "Or maybe they're finally realizing they can't win. Maybe they want to talk." I wasn't so sure. Either way, we need to be ready. Let's go to the meeting and see what they have to say. The meeting was held in the community center, and the room was packed. Patricia sat at the front, her usual clipboard in hand. But she looked different, tired almost. She cleared her throat and began speaking. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "We've had some challenges in our community recently, but the HOA is here to ensure that our neighborhood remains a safe, beautiful place for everyone." I rolled my eyes. "Safe and beautiful?" "More like controlled and suffocating," Patricia continued. "We've received feedback from some residents about the recent events and the enforcement of our bylaws. The board has decided to review our policies and consider making changes. The room erupted in murmurs. This was unexpected. One of the board members, a man named Greg, stood up. We've also received complaints about selective enforcement of the rules. Some residents feel they've been unfairly targeted, and we take those concerns seriously. Patricia's face tightened, but she didn't say anything. I raised my hand. Can I say something? Patricia hesitated, then nodded. I stood up and addressed the room. Look, we all want to live in a nice neighborhood, but the HOA's rules have gone too far. Fining people for having bird feeders or vintage cars. That's not what a community is about. We need to work together, not against each other. The room erupted in applause. Even some of the board members looked like they agreed. Patricia cleared her throat again. We hear your concerns and we're committed to making changes. But we also need to ensure that everyone follows the rules. That's why we're proposing a new committee, a neighborhood advisory board, to help guide the HOA's decisions. I raised an eyebrow. A committee? That could be a step in the right direction, or just another way for the HOA to maintain control. The meeting ended with a promise to hold another gathering in a month to discuss the proposed changes. As we left the community center, Mike clapped me on the back. You did it, man. You got them to listen. I shook my head. This isn't over yet. We need to make sure they actually follow through. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood buzzed with excitement. People were hopeful that things might finally change. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Patricia had something up her sleeve. Then, one evening, I got a call from Sarah. You're not going to believe this, she said, her voice shaking. Patricia just resigned from the HOA board. I nearly dropped the phone. What? Why? I don't know, Sarah said. But there's more. The board is holding an emergency meeting tomorrow night. They're saying it's to discuss the future of the HOA. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. Patricia resigning? An emergency meeting? Something big was about to happen. The news of Patricia's resignation spread like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone in the neighborhood was talking about it. Some people were relieved, others suspicious. I couldn't help but wonder what had prompted her to step down. Was it guilt, pressure, or was this just another one of her games? The emergency meeting was scheduled for that evening, and the community center was packed. People were standing in the back, spilling out into the hallway. The tension in the room was palpable. The meeting began with Greg, the board member, who had spoken up at the last gathering. He stood at the front, looking nervous but determined. Thank you all for coming, he said. As you may have heard, Patricia Collins has resigned from her position as HOA president. We're here to discuss the future of the HOA and how we can move forward as a community. The room erupted in murmurs. People were shouting questions, demanding answers. Greg held up his hands to quiet everyone down. I know this is a lot to process, he said, but we're committed to making changes. We've already started reviewing the bylaws, and we're open to suggestions from the community. I raised my hand. Can I say something? Greg nodded. I stood up and addressed the room. Look, we've all been through a lot because of the HOA's overreach, but this is our chance to make things right. We need to focus on what really matters. Building a community where everyone feels welcome, not just following a bunch of arbitrary rules. The room erupted in applause. Even some of the board members were nodding in agreement. Greg cleared his throat. We hear you, and we're committed to making changes. But we need your help. We're proposing a new committee, a neighborhood advisory board, made up of residents who can help guide the HOA's decisions. The idea of a committee sounded promising, but I wasn't ready to trust the HOA just yet. How do we know this isn't just another way to control us? I asked. Greg hesitated. We understand your concerns, and we're willing to make the committee as transparent as possible. We'll hold regular meetings, publish minutes, and take feedback from the community. The room buzzed with excitement. For the first time in years, it felt like we had a real chance to make a difference. But just as the meeting was winding down, something unexpected happened. Patricia walked in. The room fell silent as she made her way to the front. She looked different, tired, almost defeated. She cleared her throat and began speaking. "I know I haven't been the most popular person in this neighborhood," she said, her voice trembling. "But I want you to know that everything I did because I thought it was best for the community. I see now that I was wrong." The room was dead silent. No one knew what to say. Patricia continued, "I'm stepping down not because I want to, but because I believe it's what's best for the neighborhood. I hope you can find it in your hearts to forgive me." With that, she turned and walked out of the room. The meeting ended soon after, but the buzz in the neighborhood didn't die down. People were talking about Patricia's apology, the new committee, and what it all meant for the future of the HOA. As I walked home that night, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: relief, hope, but also a lingering sense of caution. Patricia's resignation was a step in the right direction, but I knew the fight wasn't over. The next morning, I woke up to find a note taped to my front door. It was from Patricia. "Dear Mr. Carter, I know we've had our differences, but I want to thank you for standing up for what you believe in. You've shown me that a community is more than just rules. It's about people. I hope you can forgive me. Sincerely, Patricia Collins." I stared at the note, unsure of what to think. Was this genuine, or just another attempt to save face? Either way, I knew one thing for sure. The neighborhood was changing, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were heading in the right direction. Patricia's resignation and her unexpected apology left the neighborhood in a state of cautious optimism. People were hopeful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Why had she stepped down so suddenly? And why now? A few days after the emergency meeting, I received a call from Greg. "We're holding the first meeting of the Neighborhood Advisory Board next week," he said. "We'd like you to be part of it." I was surprised. "Me? Why?" "You've been a leader in this community," Greg said. "People trust you. We need someone like you on the board to help guide the changes we're making." I agreed to join, but I made it clear that I wasn't going to be a puppet for the HOA. "If this is just for show, count me out," I said. Greg assured me it wasn't. "We're serious about making changes," he said. "We want this to work." The first meeting of the Neighborhood Advisory Board was held in the community center. The room was filled with familiar faces: Mike, Sarah, Tom, and a few other neighbors who had been vocal about the HOA's overreach. Greg and a couple of other board members were there too, along with a few new faces I didn't recognize. Greg started the meeting by outlining the goals of the board: to review the HOA's bylaws, address residents' concerns, and make recommendations for changes. "We want this to be a collaborative process," Greg said. "Your input is crucial." The meeting went well, but I couldn't help but notice that one of the new faces, a man named Derek, seemed out of place. He was quiet, almost too quiet, and he kept glancing at his phone like he was waiting for something. After the meeting, I pulled Greg aside. "Who's Derek?" I asked. Greg hesitated. "He's a consultant. He's here to help us with the transition." Something about the way Greg said it made me suspicious. "A consultant? For what?" Greg looked uncomfortable. "Look, I can't go into details, but let's just say the HOA is dealing with some financial issues. Derek's here to help us sort things out." "Financial issues?" That was news to me. I decided to keep an eye on Derek. Over the next few weeks, the Neighborhood Advisory Board met regularly. We made progress, revising outdated bylaws, reducing unnecessary fines, and even organizing another community event. But Derek's presence continued to bother me. He rarely spoke during meetings, But when he did, it was always to push for stricter enforcement of certain rules. One evening, after a particularly long meeting, I decided to follow Derek. He left the community center and walked to a nearby coffee shop. I waited outside, watching through the window as he met with someone. My heart skipped a beat when I saw who it was, Patricia. They were sitting at a corner table talking in hushed tones. Patricia looked different, more composed, almost smug. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but it was clear they were up to something. I snapped a quick photo of them together and sent it to Mike, Sarah, and Tom with a message. We need to talk, now. We met at my house later that night. I showed them the photo and explained what I'd seen. This doesn't look good, Mike said. What do you think they're planning? I don't know, I said, but it's not good. We need to find out what's going on. Sarah suggested we dig deeper into the HOA's finances. If there's something shady going on, it's probably tied to money. Tom agreed. I'll see what I can find out. I have a friend who works in accounting. Maybe he can help. Over the next few days, Tom's friend uncovered some troubling information. The HOA's finances were a mess. Missing funds, unexplained expenses, and a series of questionable transactions. When we confronted Greg with the evidence, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. I didn't know, he said. I swear I had no idea. Who's behind this? I asked. Greg hesitated, then sighed. It's Patricia. She's been siphoning money from the HOA for years. That's why she resigned. She knew we were getting close to figuring it out. The room fell silent. Patricia's apology, her sudden resignation, it had all been a cover-up. We need to take this to the authorities, Sarah said. Greg nodded. I'll handle it, but we need to be careful. Patricia's not going to go down without a fight. As we left the community center that night, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. We'd uncovered the truth, but the battle was far from over. Patricia had played us all, and now it was time to make her pay. The revelation about Patricia's embezzlement sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. People were furious, not just at Patricia, but at the entire HOA for letting it happen. Greg promised to take the evidence to the authorities, but I knew we couldn't just sit back and wait. The next morning, I called a meeting with Mike, Sarah, and Tom. We need to make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug, I said. If the HOA tries to cover this up, we'll never get justice. Sarah nodded. We should go public. Let the whole town know what's been going on, Mike agreed. The local news would eat this up. A corrupt HOA president stealing from her own community. That's a story they'd love to tell. Tom, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. We need to be careful, though. If we go public too soon, Patricia might destroy evidence or try to pin this on someone else. I thought about it for a moment. Okay, here's the plan. Tom, you and your friend keep digging into the HOA's finances. Mike and Sarah, you work on getting the neighborhood organized. We'll hold a town hall meeting and present the evidence to everyone. Once we have the community behind us, we'll go to the media. Over the next few days, we worked tirelessly. Tom and his friend uncovered more evidence, bank statements, invoices, and even a few emails between Patricia and Derek. It was clear that Patricia had been funneling money into a personal account for years. Meanwhile, Mike and Sarah spread the word about the town hall meeting. By the time the day arrived, the community center was packed. People were standing in the aisles, spilling out into the hallway. I stood at the front of the room, holding a folder full of evidence. Thank you all for coming, I said. What I'm about to tell you is going to be hard to hear, but it's important. The HOA has been mismanaged for years, and Patricia Collins has been stealing from all of us. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. I held up a hand to quiet everyone down. We have proof, I said, pulling out the bank statements and invoices. Patricia has been siphoning money from the HOA's accounts, using it for personal expenses. She's been lying to us, manipulating us, and taking advantage of this community. The room was dead silent as I laid out the evidence. People were shocked, angry, and hurt. One woman stood up, her voice trembling. "What are we going to do about it?" I took a deep breath. "We're going to take this to the authorities. But we need your help. We need to show them that this isn't just about one person. It's about holding the entire HOA accountable." The room erupted in cheers. People were shouting, demanding justice. It was clear that the neighborhood was ready to fight back. But just as the meeting was winding down, something unexpected happened. Patricia walked in. The room fell silent as she made her way to the front. She looked different, pale, almost fragile. She cleared her throat and began speaking. "I know you're all angry," she said, her voice trembling. "And you have every right to be. I made mistakes, big ones. But I want to make things right." The room erupted in shouts and boos. People were furious, and I couldn't blame them. Patricia held up her hands, trying to quiet everyone down. "Please, just hear me out. I'm willing to return the money I took. I'll step down from the HOA completely. I just want to make amends." The room was dead silent. No one knew what to say. Finally, I spoke up. "Patricia, this isn't just about the money. It's about trust. You betrayed this community, and it's going to take a lot more than an apology to fix that." Patricia nodded, tears in her eyes. "I understand, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn back your trust." The meeting ended soon after, but the buzz in the neighborhood didn't die down. People were talking about Patricia's apology, the evidence we'd uncovered, and what it all meant for the future of the HOA. As I walked home that night, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: relief, hope, but also a lingering sense of caution. Patricia's resignation and apology were steps in the right direction, but I knew the fight wasn't over. The next morning, I woke up to find a note taped to my front door. It was from Patricia. "Dear Mr. Carter, I know we've had our differences, but I want to thank you for
Patricia's
standing up for
apology
what
and
you
the
believe
evidence
in.
of her embezzlement.
You've shown
Left the
me that a
neighborhood in a
community
state
is
of
more than
shock.
just rules. People were angry.
It's about people.
But there was also
I hope
a
you
sense
can
of
forgive me.
relief. Sincerely,
Finally,
Patricia Collins.
the truth was out.
I
and we
stared
could
at the
start
note,
rebuilding.
unsure of what to think.
The authorities launched
Was
an
this genuine?
investigation into the HOA's
Or just
finances.
another attempt to
and
save
Patricia
face?
was formally
Either
charged
way,
with embezzlement.
I knew one thing for
the
sure.
news spread quickly,
The
and
neighborhood was
soon
changing,
the story was
and for
all
the
over
first
the
time
local
in a
media.
long time,
Reporters were
it
calling,
felt like we were
asking
heading
for
in
in
the
the
right
right direction.
direction.
And the neighborhood became the center of attention. But even with Patricia gone, the HOA was still a mess. The board was in disarray, and the neighborhood was divided. Some people wanted to dissolve the HOA entirely, while others believed it could be reformed. I called a meeting with Mike, Sarah, and Tom to discuss our next steps. "We need to decide what we want for the future of this neighborhood," I said. "Do we want to keep the HOA, or is it time to move on?" Mike was the first to speak. "I say we get rid of it. The HOA's caused nothing but trouble. Why keep it around?" Sarah shook her head. "I think we should try to reform it. If we can make it more transparent and accountable, it could actually do some good," Tom agreed. "We've already made progress with the Neighborhood Advisory Board. If we can keep that momentum going, we might be able to turn things around." I thought about it for a moment. "Okay, here's what we'll do. We'll hold a vote. Let the neighborhood decide what they want. But no matter what happens, we need to make sure the process is fair and transparent." Over the next few weeks, we worked to organize the vote. We held town hall meetings, distributed flyers, and even created a website where people could learn more about the options. The debate was heated, but for the first time in years, it felt like the neighborhood was coming together. The day of the vote arrived, and the community center was packed. People lined up to cast their ballots, and the atmosphere was electric. When the results were finally announced, it was close, but the majority had voted to reform the HOA. I stood at the front of the room, holding the results. "The neighborhood has spoken," I said. "We're going to reform the HOA, but it's going to take work.
We need to make sure it's transparent, accountable, and focused on what's best for the community." The room erupted in cheers. People were hopeful, excited, and ready to move forward. But just as the meeting was winding down, something unexpected happened. Patricia walked in. The room fell silent as she made her way to the front. She looked different, humbled, almost fragile. She cleared her throat and began speaking. "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything," she said, her voice trembling. "But I want to help. I want to make things right." The room was dead silent. No one knew what to say. Finally, I spoke up. "Patricia, you've done a lot of damage, but if you're serious about making amends, we're willing to give you a chance." Patricia nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you. I'll do whatever it takes." The meeting ended soon after, but the buzz in the neighborhood didn't die down. People were talking about the vote, the future of the HOA, and Patricia's unexpected offer to help. As I walked home that night, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Relief, hope, but also a lingering sense of caution. The neighborhood was changing, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were heading in the right direction. The next morning, I woke up to find a note taped to my front door. It was from Patricia. "Dear Mr. Carter, I know we've had our differences, but I want to thank you for standing up for what you believe in. You've shown me that a community is more than just rules. It's about people. I hope you can forgive me. Sincerely, Patricia Collins." I stared at the note, unsure of what to think. Was this genuine? Or just another attempt to save face? Either way, I knew one thing for sure. The neighborhood was changing, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were heading in the right direction. Moral of the story: a community is stronger when it stands together. Rules and regulations are important, but they should never come at the cost of kindness, fairness, and unity.